Hello, my name is Michael Todaran, and I am today's host of the Landscape Architecture Podcast. And today's guest is Chris Reed of Stoss. Hello.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
I'm
Great to
good.
be here.
Thank you. I'm very happy that you are here as well. I'm very excited about this episode. For those of you listening or watching, you could, while we're talking, you could go to stoss.net, stoss.net. And I highly recommend that you click on the journal section that has a lot of really good, interesting ideas about your work or your firm's work. So before we begin, can you recap your last week or week and a half?
Yeah, it's quite unusual. We're in the middle of the COVID crisis, and it's been this slow progression in many ways, starting at school. So I teach at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And as you know, schools and universities were one of the first to begin shutdowns and moves to online learning. So that began in earnest. Really just this week. We were on spring break last week, but it started a little bit just prior to spring break. I'm used to a lot of online work. As you know, we have offices in Boston and Los Angeles, and then we're working across the country and occasionally overseas. So we're very much set up to have conversations, presentations, and even design workshops, charrettes, online, live in person. It's gotten to an extreme in that sense when, if you're meeting with a small group of 6 people, you have 6 rectangles with floating heads on the computer in front of you. But I've got to say the technology is there to be able to do this in really interesting ways. So it's been quite an adjustment. I will say I've spent a lot of time staring at computer screens and people's heads, but it's great to have that level of both professional and social connectivity and interaction. I mean, it's quite a treat in a way. And, if you think even 10, 20 years ago, we would be living a radically different life at the, in the same situation and at the same moment. So I am grateful for that. It's interesting too. It's too early to begin to be radically thoughtful about the way in which pandemics can begin to inform the landscape project in a big way. But I take the time every day to get outside, run, walk the dog, and it's amazing to see people in the public realm, in parks, still using them, but using them in some of the simpler, most basic, fundamental ways to get out, to walk, to experience nature in some cases, to experience landscape, to get fresh air, sunshine, and to scale back a little bit to some of the fundamental aspects of just being a human being and being able to enjoy landscape and enjoy open space. There's not that level of social interactivity, whether you're talking from a recreational sports standpoint or even the intense programming of social spaces that's become quite popular lately. But I've got to say there is a wonderful sensibility about just being out with other people and enjoying the rich public realm that we have. It also makes me realize how lucky we are in Boston, where my home is, but the extensive open space systems that we have, and that they're at a large scale, so that within a short walk of my house, you can take a pretty long walk or ride on the Emerald Necklace along the Charles River out to the harbor front. And I think as much as small scale spaces scattered throughout the city are important, it's a reminder that those need to function in conjunction with very large scale public landscapes in the heart of cities to give people access in times like this to just get out and get away from things and put their cares away for a bit.
Now, the Emerald Necklace, you're referring to a series of parks that was at the beginning stage of the master planning of Boston, right? Like it was very early on, creating this series of parks that were all connected. Now, you also have an office in Los Angeles. Is it too late for Los Angeles to create some kind of Emerald Necklace, or can we try to adapt the LA River as that, or do we have to just rethink a different system for Los Angeles?
It's not too late, but it's not going to look like the Emerald Necklace, and that's a good thing. I mean, as you point out, Boston does have this long legacy, even dating back to the 17th century with the Boston Common, right at the heart of the city. LA has been amazing in the last 10, 20 years in the way it started to rediscover the potential of a public realm. And you see that in a lot of different ways. You see that with Grant Park. You see that with improvements in Santa Monica, streetscapes and Tongva Park. You see it really across the city. For so long, you know, open space recreation in Los Angeles was all about the beaches and the mountains, right, and the hills. But there's this incredible effort to really rethink the infrastructural spaces of the city and the potential they have to really transform urban life in Los Angeles, and to do it in a way that's absolutely characteristic of the city. The LA River is part of that, and you know, you would extend that to other water and river-based projects like the Bayona Creek. Interstitial infill projects are really going to be important as well. But you know, there's something about the infrastructural nature of Los Angeles that on the one hand, we need to get out of the mindset of these single-minded, single-purpose infrastructures. But I think we can install a new public realm that still celebrates the distinctiveness of this region, this culture, this city, and do it in a way that's quite distinct from large park systems that have come before it.
I agree. You had a proposal for the end of the 2 freeway. Was that a pro bono work, or was there a client that asked for that proposal, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so it was part of the series of pieces that Christopher Hawthorne wrote when he was architecture critic for the LA Times. He did a beautiful series of pieces on freeways in LA. And it's funny, I know a lot of architects really wanted Christopher to be writing more about buildings and architecture, and he was taking on some pretty interesting and important urban issues, and so I really appreciate his writing. The series really looked at the freeways as a cultural phenomenon of LA. You know, Rainer Banham celebrated them in the For Ecologies book. But one of the things that Christopher pointed out when he was looking at the design of the early freeways was the civic ambition that was really embedded in the design. They were designed, right? They weren't just roadways. And there was something about how you would design pieces of this very large scale infrastructure that lent a certain identity, scale, and ambition to the work, and it was through design that happened. And he contrasted that with, the expansion of the 405, for instance, and the way in which, as much as community input, community engagement is important, he then took a look at the way that expansion project still resulted in a big expansion. But I think his critique of it was how all along its length, there were bits and pieces of negotiated architecture, design, and engineering that really fit one constituency or another. And so your overall experience was still, 10, 12 lanes of freeway with a bunch of junky looking stuff on the outside. And so he took it on as a design issue. He took it on as a social issue. He looked at homelessness relative to the freeways as one of the main places where homeless occupy, on top of underneath freeway infrastructure. But he was also interested in imagining forward what could future potential reimaginations of the freeway be. So he approached us, and he approached Michael Maltzahn and asked each of us to imagine quickly one of the stubby ends of one of the freeways, a freeway that had, made its way into the urban fabric and just ended. And very much put the prompt on the table. What if you just took away that last little piece of freeway, got the cars on the ground? What would you do? And his other prompt was, I don't want you to just erase it. Is there a way in which you can still find a way to reuse or celebrate in a very civic way the infrastructure that's there?
So you took it on? You took it on. You said, okay. And
yeah. No, it was a great opportunity. For years, I had been doing work at school, looking at the infrastructural and urbanistic history of Los Angeles. Had a lot of students doing that research. We were having these really interesting conversations about it. And so very early on, when we opened an office out there, to be able to be given this opportunity was great. It was a chance to reimagine what you could do. And for us, it was about really flipping the freeway on its head. If the freeway was about disconnecting neighborhoods and social groups, if it was about wasting resources and water, and if it was about polluting the air and really minimizing social life, we could reimagine that piece of freeway as a social and ecological machine, a new kind of infrastructure that would really bring people together in many ways, that would capture water and store it, that could create new ecologies, that could generate energy, and that could clean the air from the cars passing nearby. And so it's like an extraordinary opportunity to just kind of reimagine.
It would be like the antithesis of a traditional freeway, Los Angeles freeway. Yeah,
exactly. But with a real kind of spirit and identity that was very much about Los Angeles as opposed to any other place.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some of your projects, but before we do that, I'd like to hear if you could relate some of the sentiments of your students right now. They must be asking a lot of questions in regards to the future of landscape architecture. I think probably some of the more pressing questions they might have is employment, where they stand. I think a first-year undergrad might have different concerns than a third-year master's student. So
yep.
Can you kind of encapsulate some of the concerns that you are hearing from your students?
Yeah, so the last 2 or 3 weeks, I'll say, has put the whole economy into chaos, as you know. And, up until that point, I'd say the economy was going so strong, there weren't enough people to hire to do the work that individually and collectively all the offices I know had. Huge demand, and 3 weeks ago I was having a conversation with my students many of whom are graduating, saying, don't worry about it. You're coming out of the school, you're well trained, you'll be in high demand. I don't know where we are on that front right now, because certainly a lot of things have come to a halt construction wise. Of course, in an economy like this, the first thing to fall out typically is development work. This is where having a diversified portfolio of work is really, really important. But we'll see. It's a big to be determined on the economic front. And news is breaking every day. Apart from that, though, I'll say, students are very much interested in the climate emergency, and in understanding what they can do as individuals through advocacy to begin to help address that issue. But they're also interested professionally in what we can do. The GSD, we're adding a new required course called Climate by Design. That's going to be required for every single person going through that program.
At what stage will they be taking that class?
So for incoming MLA1s in the 3-year program, it'll be in their 3rd semester. For incoming MLA1 APs or MLA2s, it'll be in their 1st semester.
Okay.
And it's being crafted right now. It's an exciting new initiative, and it's a place where I think the landscape architecture discipline is very well poised to take leadership. We have been taking that leadership for years, I would say, within the profession, through our work, through advocacy as well. But it's now being firmly embedded, not just casually within coursework and studios, but absolutely front and center within our program. And for us, it's about design. We talk about advocacy, we talk about public policy and all that, but we also want to work these issues through design and really find where design has agency in this mix. So that's really important and one critical piece of what students are interested in. Another key topic these days is really the social, as it relates to issues of social equity, social justice, environmental justice, bringing to light cultural histories that have often been suppressed, and really looking at, frankly, non-Western, non-white traditions as starting points for thinking about design. What are the indigenous traditions? How do we look at precedent, and what are we looking at when we bring a precedent project to the table? Are they all European and American precedents, or can we really radically expand the set of precedent projects that we're bringing to the table for them? We've had a couple talks recently by folks who deal with indigenous architecture and design, indigenous ecology. And these are issues which get at the heart of other ways of thinking. And I think in a lot of the coursework, whether it's history theory, whether it's studio, whether it's some of the bigger conversations that we're having at the school, how can we really take on a broader, more expansive understanding of the starting points of design and the cultures and histories that can begin to inform that?
Do you find that the students' questions and concerns and overall mindset, do you find that not filtering, but do you find it, do you find that their ideologies are getting, does Stoss kind of absorb those ideas of the youth as you teach, and are you being exposed to ideas that you wouldn't have thought of? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a lot of ways, we've been taking these issues on in a number of our projects for many years, and doing it in implicit ways and more explicit ways. I think in the design of public spaces, we've always talked about how do you program and design for the widest possible audience, to invite the widest range of people in, to make them feel invited, welcome, included in the activity that's there, and that there's a place for them. And so that's been a starting point for our work, and you can see that in some of the built open spaces, plazas that we've done. We've explicitly taken on issues of race, social justice, social equity in a number of projects. I think seminal for us was the work we did in Detroit as part of the Detroit Future City project, led by Tony Griffin, a planner out of New York City, in really getting at questions of shifting the ways in which we work and think, shifting our approach to public engagement in ways that really work directly with community members through quiet, sometimes long conversation, and starting with them, not with us or what our ambition is. And I think that this that's extended into the work that we did recently on the Shoto Greenway in St. Louis, where the client from the very start put equity right at the heart of the project. And I think for us, knowing some of the social and racial issues in New York, in St. Louis, it was natural to put the team together that we did, but it was an incredibly diverse team. Tony Griffin, again, was pretty much a co-lead on that project. We worked hard to find some locally embedded artists, young artists, who could each contribute to the project with their professional expertise and creativity on the one hand, but would also bring their life experiences of living in St. Louis as a Black person, as a Middle Eastern person, and really bring those experiences and perspectives into the heart of the team conversation, rather than being somebody we go and talk to. And so I think there are many ways that we do this. I think it's important for me. I mean, I grew up in a working class town in southeastern Massachusetts. My dad was a funeral director. My mom was a nurse. I'm a white guy, obviously. We lived in quite a diverse setting. And as I've grown up, married, had kids. My kids are mixed race, African American. And so a lot of the issues about social equity, race, really hit home with me. They're personal in a way, but they've been deeply embedded in the collective thinking at Stoss in ways that I think have become embedded in the kind of work we do and the approaches that we take to working with people.
You mentioned a diversified portfolio, and your firm went through the 2007 recession. What is well, first, can you explain what a diversified portfolio in landscape architecture means to you? And then can you also touch on, did your diversified portfolio come about from the lessons you learned in 2007? If applicable.
Yeah, well, a little bit. Certainly, it's something that a lot of business school people always talk about, and really wanting to get that mix. You don't start out that way, obviously, and some people start out having a lot of residential work. Some people start out working in the development sector with institutions. We deliberately started out in the public realm. I was very keen on working on public projects with public entities. Um, and that was a particular choice at the time. I could see other firms who had started with residential work, particularly in New England, struggle to move into the public realm. Because the people on the other end were saying, well, yeah, but you're not dealing with the complexities of people and infrastructure and regulatory agencies and all that. And I think at the time too, I mean, there's a bit of a different New England aesthetic that's a bit traditional here. I think actually Los Angeles is quite the opposite. I think there's a way in which contemporary design, even at a residential scale, has a different kind of imprint and impact. But for me, it was, starting with public work was really important. We've expanded it from there. We do have development work, we have institutional work, and we have some residential work as well. Much of our development work really is about public realm still. It may be privately owned, but it's really about a bigger contribution to the public realm and open space. In part, a lot of our development work is in and around Boston, where there are very strict requirements for open space and publicly accessible space. So that's part of it. But I think right now, if you talk a diversified portfolio, you'd have development work, public work, maybe some institutional work, and residential work. Those things go on different cycles. They work on different cycles. Development work is quite volatile. Residential work varies by client. Public work sometimes is the first to, it's the thing that sometimes is sustained through periods of time like this, or it's the first thing to come back. Because while a lot of development and construction work may pause, a lot of planning work steps in then to begin the next wave of reimagining places. So right now we have a decent sized public portfolio, which is very good, but we, like many other people, are taking it day by day.
Do you feel like the U.S. and possibly the world might be primed for, like FDR type projects to come online, like a very aggressive new deals? And
yeah, I don't think it'll be quite FDR in scope, especially given our current federal administration. Although I am heartened to see some of the very recent, even within the last 24 hours, some of the bills that have been passed in Congress and the way in which they're intended to support a wide swath of people. I do think, I think the last crash, there was an emphasis on investment in shovel-ready projects, right? And so that was one version of a newer version of what could be a FDR type proposal. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I do anticipate there will be some stimulus money in places to either continue certain work or get things going. So, I'm optimistic on that front, but I think right now it's about dealing with the crisis at hand, and trying to stop the flow, if you will, before we get on to those kinds of reinvestments.
Tell me about one of your current projects right now. I know that you mentioned the Moakley. Is that how you pronounce it? Moakley
Moakley
Park.
Park in Boston. Yep.
Moakley.
Moakley Park, named after Joe Moakley, a former congressman from Southie in Boston.
I like it. First of all, I'm happy that you said Southie, because I've been dying to figure out a way to incorporate that in our conversation. Because
yeah. No, it's totally Southie, and I've got to
Yeah.
say, we're part of the stakeholder group. Our office is within short run, half mile of the park and the beach. I use it almost every day, as do a number of people in the office. It's a 60-acre public park owned by the city of Boston, plus beachfront owned by the state of Massachusetts, and roads. And so really it's up to about 90 acres total. On the one hand, it's a climate resilience project. It's one of the flood paths for sea level rise and coastal flooding to enter the city. On the other hand, it's a recreation, open space reinvestment project. As I said, it's 60 acres of mostly sports fields right now that haven't been upgraded in many, many years. It's a project that takes on issues of social equity quite directly.
Before we go any further, are we in schematic on this project, or where is the project?
We're in an advanced concept pre-schematic phase right now. The social equity component's really important on two sides of the park. It's surrounded by public housing, low-income public housing. And unlike in other places where investment in open space usually leads to increase in property value, gentrification, and more importantly, displacement of populations, because the Boston Housing Authority owns that land, the beneficiaries of this project are going to be some of the city's poorest.
And the intention is then to have that remain public housing, right? Like,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
One of those properties was upgraded a number of years ago. I'd say within the last decade or so. A second of those properties is under renovation redevelopment. The Housing Authority is now partnering with private development. And they are imagining new forms of mixed public housing, so that everybody who currently lives there will be offered a brand new residence in the redevelopment, and the phasing of that is going to be really quite careful and strategic to keep people on the site. But they're also going to mix in other levels of affordable and market rate housing. In some ways, an important project that will release the stigma on what, for so long have been known as the projects, right? Usually single low income minority, and rather than having identifiable places where only one income group lives, the city's quite interested in finding ways to mix that, but also making sure that they're looking out for the resident populations.
And have you worked on a project at this scale that has integrated these types of systems before, or is this?
I mean, this one's a big one for us in many ways, and it's actually hitting at a number of issues simultaneously for this. I mean, the other piece of it is, not only are we making a better community park for the kids and neighbors that are right there, but it's Boston's largest harborfront park. And it's well served by public infrastructure, 2 MBTA stops right nearby. And so the other piece of this is, how can we think of this as a truly citywide destination? How is it that kids, and what's interesting is it's a 15-minute bike ride from some of the city's poorest and wealthiest neighborhoods. You get that biggest cross section. And so we're really playing that up. And we're hoping it helps form that last link in the Emerald Necklace that was never built. This park sits at the end of that last link, which would connect to Central Park, and in that sense would give kids in the heart of Roxbury and Dorchester a very direct connection to Boston Harbor.
Now, I can't remember off the top of my head if the Emerald Necklace was, did it circle back on itself, or is it more linear and it dies out and then this park would complete
it almost came all the way to the waterfront, and
then Moakley would be the last
Moakley
link.
would be that last link. Yeah.
Okay.
Moakley was never intended to be part of the necklace. It was a wetland edge. The connection between Franklin Park and the harbor was the piece that was always intended but never built. With Moakley was filled in afterwards. You get that destination park at the end of the link. The city is talking about how to then really create that link with a real parkway boulevard. And then from Moakley, you pick up a couple of harborfront linear parks that bring you out to Castle Island. So it's a critical piece in that sense. It's ambitious in scope. It's Boston's first opportunity to show how you design for climate change and sea level rise. The city's been working neighborhood by neighborhood on a series of plans, and we've been involved in a couple of those. But a lot of the land in Boston along the waterfront is privately owned. This is the piece that the city owns. And it's the opportunity for the city to demonstrate what it wants to do. So for the Mayor Marty Walsh, one of his key issues is climate change and how we're going to adapt to it. This becomes a signature project for him, but it marries importantly and nicely with issues of social equity, and in that sense becomes a really premier signature project for the administration.
So would you be the lead in this? Would Stoss be the lead in this project?
Yep, we are the lead. We were hired initially to do a vision plan, and now we've put together a team. We brought in a partner, Weston Sampson, which is a multidisciplinary engineering firm with a landscape architecture division. And so they've become our partner, and we're lockstep with them to begin to work through the issues of flood control engineering and permitting, which are hugely complex. There are multiple agencies, there are multiple utilities that are beneath the park, and so the technical and regulatory piece of this is highly complex. Yeah. The nice part is we have some experience working on waterfronts in a number of places. We did some work a number of years ago along the riverfront in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where we had to deal with new flood elevations and design a waterfront that flooded in a very dense urban setting. Did that in Milwaukee, Wisconsin as well. And so, and in fact, it's those projects that as the city was starting to realize it had to deal somehow with climate change, we hadn't had much work at all with the city of Boston prior to that. But both with a change of administration and personnel in the city, and also with a change of priority, we were able to demonstrate experience dealing with dense urban conditions that flooded.
So that was part of your RFQ then. Yeah, you put in all of those projects. And
yeah, absolutely, and we were able to really talk them through in the interview process, and so I think that gave us something distinct, and allowed us to begin to develop this relationship with the city.
Well, it also
proceeding. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it also helps that you're local, which is always nice. Did you walk in with like a Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup just to
not quite,
punctuate?
Because everybody can. I mean, Boston's rich with landscape architecture practices, as you well know. In fact, the former commissioner of the Parks Department, Chris Cook, he's now chief of energy and environment. He's essentially a very high-level cabinet member for the mayor. He was instrumental with his staff and the current commissioner, Ryan. They were instrumental in really leveraging the talent of the landscape architecture community in Boston. And I saw Chris give a presentation. Chris himself is incredibly dynamic on the one hand and approachable and incredibly friendly on the other. And he gave a presentation of all the efforts being made in Boston on a number of projects. MVVA just finished a small but important project next to the Children's Museum on the harbor front in memory of a small boy that was killed in the Boston Marathon attack a few years back. But a beautiful park dedicated to children in his memory. They've got a really interesting team led by Reed Hildebrand with Agency and Mass Design Group doing a plan for Franklin Park. They've got an interesting team led by Weston Sampson and Sherry Ruane, who years ago worked for the department. Parks Department has built a really robust landscape practice, and they got work for the renovation of Boston Common, and then they're our partner on the Moakley Park project. So an incredible array of very talented people and firms that the city's assembled.
From that Boston Marathon attack, have you seen particular demand for landscapes and increasing like the depth of their bollards for traffic and frequency of them to control traffic and cameras and different ways of like, are the cities asking for an increase in protection?
No, in fact, in some ways just the opposite. I think post 9/11 there was a lot of that. I think after the attack on the Boston Marathon, there was a real surge of what I can only describe as kind of local Boston attitude.
And
David
what is
Ortiz, that? Well, it's kind of like, fuck you.
Yeah.
This is our city. David Ortiz said that at the first Red Sox game after the marathon. I think it's one of the few F-bombs that they allowed on television to happen. But he said, this is our fucking city.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the attitude about it. I think there's been a concerted effort to respectfully remember the folks who were lost and to help with the folks who were, severely physically damaged from the attack.
Did you run in it? Did you run? I don't know how big of a runner you are.
I am a slow runner that doesn't go far. I'm new to running.
Right. Okay.
I take lots of pictures when I run, but I am not anywhere near.
I was gonna DM you when you were in San Diego to see if you wanted to go running, and then I chickened out because I was like, oh no, he's probably really fast and goes really long, and so now I regret it. I should have.
No. My kids. I have two teenage boys, 16. Actually, they're 17 and 19, and they like to run backwards next to me.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, that's good for the ego, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
But I always usually ask, one of my questions that I like to ask during these interviews is how you cope with the day-to-day stresses of being a landscape architect. And of course, you being part of Stoss, which is, in 2 locations now and doing big projects. And I imagine that running is one of your big outs to just clear your head, or.
Yeah, I got to say, I started running and working out a few years back, probably 6 years ago. And, it was a concerted effort to lose weight and become healthier. On the one hand, I didn't realize the way in which it would positively affect my mental attitude. I tend to work out midday. And I asked Amy Whitesides, who's studio director in Boston. She's been with me, I think, for 9 years now. And I turned to her one day. I said, is this disruptive that I go out in the middle of the day? And she said, no, you come back so happy and calm that, keep doing it.
Yeah, that's great.
Do it twice a day if necessary. So yeah, no, it's important to have that balance. I mean, it's hard, and it was hard. We had kids. Well, we still have kids, but it's hard when kids are little. My wife is a full-time attorney. We have busy, complicated lives, and then you're trying to do everything you're doing at work. And then if you're trying to teach, it's just incredibly complex. But yeah, I mean, even now, especially now when we're all sitting around looking at screens for far too long all day and not moving much, really scheduling that time in for yourself every day, or, I'm usually four out of 5 days easily during the work week, and another day or 2 on the weekend, where I'm just thinking about taking care of myself. And I think that's a big part of it. The work itself energizes me. We have some amazing projects, great clients. I love our people, incredibly talented people that are working hard to do things that are hard. There are no easy answers to some of the questions and challenges that are being put in front of us. But I think with thoughtfulness, patience, the ability to listen to people, and then the ability to transform those thoughts and ideas into something that has real impact and ambition, I think is really at the heart of what we're trying to do. And that's what energizes me.
Have you had to give a like an all hands meeting via Zoom to all of your staff and talk them through this process?
Oh yeah, every few days.
Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to, it's a funny balance because, you want to be there for people. You want to be realistic. You want to be comforting. But I also find that people are being overwhelmed right now with breaking news and emails about this or that or whatever. That I'm also trying to, so I say this a little bit to my students and a little bit to my staff, use the good work in front of you as a way to escape that, right? We're all living in this new world. We all have very real issues that we're going to deal with. We'll talk about that. We'll support each other. But let's use the work to take our minds off of that, right? And start to think about how is it that we can, through the work, change the lives of people in positive ways. And I think if we can do that, and I think if there are, a few moments during the day where people can just indulge in the thing that they're doing, I think that's really important.
That's very sage advice, and I agree. And I'm hearing a lot of people talk about that as well. I know for me personally, I'm on an information diet, very deliberate. I know my objectives. I know that the work that I need to do. I know that I need to stay home, and now I could just, and anything big that comes along, I'm sure I'll hear of it. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other piece of it is, um, 4 weeks ago it would have been highly unprofessional in some circles to have your dog or cat walk onto the screen, or your kid
Yeah,
to
yeah,
start talking. And frankly, I'm finding those moments offer a bit of relief and humanity,
I agree.
into the situation that we find ourselves.
I agree. There's a certain charm to it, and a little bit of us kind of checking ourselves of where we are as in relation to, it's okay for a dog or a kid to come in. It's not a big deal.
Absolutely.
Like, we don't have to pretend that this isn't our reality.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me about, you have another project in Canada as well, right?
Yeah, such a different project. I mean, St. Louis is going through the heart of the city through some pretty tough infrastructural barriers, getting into neighborhoods that have been not invested in for years. Boston's about this potential waterfront gem, but still within the city, and dealing with complexities of climate change and engineers and regulatory agencies and all this. Edmonton's kind of a beautiful project. The river valley in Edmonton is incredibly wide and dramatic and deep, with very steep sides. When you're on the river or in the river valley, they have a beautiful set of parkways, park systems, and trails all the way along the river. There are moments you're still in the heart of the city, and on the top of those bluffs are urban and suburban development, but you can't see any of it. And you really feel like you're in this wild landscape. And it is a wild landscape. It's home to bears and coyotes and all sorts of animals and fish. And so to be involved in a project where we're trying to figure out how to provide human access to the river and along the river, and do it in a way that continues to allow bears and coyotes to move in the way they need to move, is really something quite different.
So, like, planned corridors.
Yeah. The project's about 2.5 miles of riverfront. And part of it is where the city gets closest to the river. There is this one moment, Edmonton downtown is set back a little bit from the river by about a mile, but it's the one place where there's a slower, more gentle slope that comes down to an old power plant, and some areas that have the potential to become redevelopment areas, new neighborhoods.
I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I imagine that Canada's probably an easier sell on fauna corridors.
They are. They're also, frankly, an easier sell on government-supported open space.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the time when in America, cities in the state and federal agencies had budgets to build parks and open space. Canada still does, and so this is money that's publicly funded and has been allocated by city government.
So can you move through ideas faster with them? Like, you propose to, like, is a dialogue like really quick as opposed to like having to? No.
No, Canadians are very deliberate, thoughtful people. They very much like the conversation and engagement process involved. But whereas in the U.S., a lot of our work comes along with integrated strategies for programming and revenue generation, and ideas about economic development and governance, and what is the package of things that you're going to use to build the project. They've already got the public money allocated for it, so it's quite different in that way. And so that's a refreshing change. but it's a great, it's such a different project, and in some ways we're taking about 2 miles of the riverfront, which I would say is in the worst current condition, with a roadway next to it, and we're trying to rework that trail system and those promenades, and really layer in better ecologies. A lot of the ecologies along that stretch are denuded, and the experience is really inhibited by the roadway. So we're beginning to rethink that piece of it, how it connects into other parks and amenities along the way, and how all of that culminates in this one moment where the city gets closest to the river in a celebratory public landing that really allows for direct access down to the water. So it's a really beautiful project in a much different context than the other work. But it's a nice threesome of projects that I think in many ways summarizes the heart of the complexities of the work that we're doing, as well as the different kinds of scales and ambition of the work that we do.
Now, your firm has worked globally. You've had projects all around the world. And from my experience working in projects in Dubai or Serbia or China or the US, I find that that there's a little bit of a learning curve in regards to how to work with different cultures and what's important and how people interact. How do you navigate that? I mean, you've been doing it for a while, so you probably have seen a large gamut of that. But how do you prepare your team for that type of cultural differences in doing business?
Sure. I mean, on the one hand, we always need a trusted local partner who really understands what's going on. Is
that where you start?
That is often where we start.
Okay.
We kind of start with the client first, really,
right?
And try to figure out, is that client reputable? What are their interests? What are the agendas that are in front of them?
So are you saying that not only are they vetting you, but you're vetting the client as well to see if you want to?
Yeah, we're quite selective
Can you, before we go,
projects that will go
before we go into my original question, I'd like to hear a little bit about that vetting process. What is important to you, and what kind of things are you concerned with when vetting a client?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at what the project is. So, does it hit at the heart of some of our interests? Can we contribute in meaningful ways? Is there an opportunity for pursuing some of our own environmental agendas, for instance, or social agendas, even if it's in a quiet way? We're not interested in clients who are telling us we can't do something, though we understand that you talk about things in different ways, in different places, and in different cultures. That happens across the US too. We don't talk about climate change within every state and municipality that we work across the country. And we often don't do that around the world. It differs, though. I mean, we've worked in China, we've worked in the Middle East. Ultimately, those projects have to deal with those issues, right? So sometimes it's the way in which you talk about it, as flooding, but it's finding ways to address the things that we think are really important and fundamental to the work we do. If we can't, we're not interested in that project.
Now, before you go farther, how that decision, I mean, it almost seems like a little bit of a luxury to be able to turn down work. Or how do those decisions come about? Do you talk with your team? And because
we do, we do have conversations. We do have conversations about values. We do have conversations are there places that we don't want to be working?
Mm-hmm.
We also have, the other part of it is the financial and contractual arrangements. Again, growing up, I never had a support system. Like, I'm, not independently wealthy. So I can't just front a project that we're not going to get paid on.
Right.
So having very rigorous contractual terms and financial arrangements in place is also really important.
And did you learn
none
that?
of that works.
Yeah.
I learned that mostly from listening to other people, but I also learned it through the practicality of, I didn't grow up having extra money to throw around. So being really diligent and careful about how you make investment and where you spend resources and all that. So I think we're quite careful. And to me, if a project doesn't meet a set of social and environmental values, if it doesn't meet some of our financial tests, if it doesn't meet some of the rigors of the legal issues that are important to us, then it's not a project. It's not like we're giving something up. It's not a project. It's not a legitimate project to start with. And so, I don't worry about it. We haven't given something up in those instances. But I think, to your first question, how do we deal with it? We deal with it like we do in any other place. I mean, Green Bay, Wisconsin is not the same as Galveston, Texas. It's not the same as St. Louis, and it's not the same as Los Angeles. What we need to do is really get on the ground and understand the situation at hand, whether it's Dubai, Abu Dhabi, coastal China, the heart of Europe, it doesn't matter. We need to understand what's in play here, and we need to listen with open minds to the people who are at work on the project or are implicated by the project. And it's from those starting points that we begin to craft an approach and ultimately a set of design proposals.
I have a question for you. It's more general, but I'd like to hear what your response would be. What's something that you've learned that you could have learned by listening to somebody and you had to learn the hard way? And what's something that, and then what's something that you learned the hard way but feel like you only could have learned it that way?
I think I don't know which of the questions this answers, but there was a time when I worked for 5.5, 6 years at Hargraves Associates before I founded my firm, now known as Hargraves Jones, with Mary Margaret Jones leading that firm. And I soon took on project management responsibility within the firm. Ended up running a lot of the large-scale projects in the Louisville waterfronts, University of Cincinnati, and even the Clinton Presidential Library, the waterfront park there. What I learned there was how critically important it was to have the right set of contracts in place and to the right set of organization of project teams, internal teams, and sub-consultant teams. I think in both at Hargraves and at Stoss, getting those things right has protected us in incredibly important ways in a number of different instances that have come up over time, and so in some ways have prevented the hard lessons because of the very rigorous and diligent way that I was trained to do and exposed to the importance of some of those very important legal contractual issues. So they've staved off some of those really hard moments, if you will. There are always these moments where you're just so enticed by the shininess of the project or the thing, and you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll let down my regard a little bit, and I'll step over the line a little, and I'll put too much work in and too much effort, and I'll just go for it and maybe trust that this one will be okay. That's come back to bite us once or twice, and it's always a good reminder of not to do it. Now, we don't overextend ourselves in radical ways, but those small instances of doing that are good reminders of why you don't do that much, if at all, and you certainly don't take big risks when you shouldn't be taking those risks.
What is it?
This is like heavy business talk.
Yeah, well, that's good. I think a lot. Well, our listeners are a little bit insular, and so at all levels, we have from students all the way to owners of major firms or CEOs, and so it's good to hear wherever you're at in your career these types of discussions. So thank you for being open.
Yeah, no. Happy to do that. I mean, and in fact, it's a particular set of interests I do have, and something I'm trying to share with students. I'm teaching for the first time this semester a seminar called Landscape Practices, where we're featuring 23 different firms over the course of 12 or 13 weeks. And what I've asked each of the participants to do is just give us a little 5 minutes on what the ambition of the firm is, the kind of work you do and all that. But give us 30 to 35 minutes on how you operationalize that. How do you make it work as a practice? Whether you're nonprofit, for-profit, or you have an academic research practice, how do you work that? How do you fund that? How do you go after work? Who are your collaborators? What are the internal structures? How has your firm transformed itself through a number of different phases of the economy or just of the practice itself? What are the behind the scenes?
Do you find that some? Oh, sorry.
No. It's just what are the behind the scenes on the daily life of practice and on the thinking that allows you to do the work that you want to do.
I'm curious if some firms are able to respond to that in a day, and other firms are like, oh, maybe we should be thinking about these. I think maybe some firms for the first time are really have never been asked that, and it just kind of formed organically through their work. And
actually for some of those firms, being able to get them to articulate that is really great. Firms don't happen accidentally. Successful firms aren't out there because they haven't thought through a lot of these things. They think very carefully about it. And I've got to say, the people who have participated have been, for the most part, very willing to be open and honest and really sharing with students. We do not record those sessions. I post them on Instagram as photographs. And I'll usually quote the person or people that are in every week. But I think it's really important to create a forum. It's a small group, it's 14 students. And these are usually it's 14 and myself and the person, or sometimes it's two people. But the ability to have a really intimate conversation about the challenges, the opportunities, the different modes and methods, the sometimes humorous stories that go along with the odd founding of firms. It's been great. So it's certainly something students are interested in. And based on the reception I'm getting on Instagram, it's something that a lot of people are interested in and would really love to share it.
Yeah, I'd love to. I know that you're peeling back the curtain a little bit, and so you'd have to be very careful, but it would be interesting if you could write at the end of it some kind of abstract that summarizes it in a general way that you could share with because I know that you also like to write as well, like you're active in still writing.
Yeah, I have a book project underway that I need to finish off before I do some other writing. I do think that there is a version of this landscape practices thing that could make a beautiful book. I think it would have to be different, because I think the starting point explicitly would be, these are recorded conversations and interviews that are going to be transformed into a book setting. So that's a slightly different project than the kind of project that we have right now. But I do write. I think it's always been important to do research, to write, to use that mode of thinking as a way to explore, to generate new ideas and to share those ideas. The book I'm writing right now is called Mise en Scène, and it's really about the social lives and afterlives of urban landscapes. We're doing it in a way focusing on 7 cities across the US. These are cities that we happen to work in: Los Angeles, Galveston, St. Louis, Green Bay, Ann Arbor, Detroit, and Boston. They'll be arranged geographically, left to right, west to east. And I've been working with a photojournalist, Mike Bellamy, for the last year or so. And what he's been doing is going into the places that we are working, and in some cases have built projects. And he's using his photojournalist eye to really document the life of these places. And what's interesting about it is, I mean, it's a radically different approach to a monograph. It's really trying to address the broader arc of issues that are at the heart of contemporary practice these days across the states. But he, there's a real sort of documentary quality to the photography. It's all black and white. It's quite beautiful, but stark. Very much not glamorized, not like most architectural and design photography. And he's photographing our projects in the same way. And the projects are simply embedded within each of the city chapters and city stories. Because our projects are so much about the social life or ecological life or the urban life of these places, he's able to show the conditions on the ground that we're responding to, and then sometimes the afterlife of the places that we've designed, and trying to find threads of connection there. So that's an exciting project. I'm writing for it. I'm
very
curating
exciting.
It. There'll be very select drawing work incorporated within it. And right now I've got a fabulous team of contributors to the project that include Mimi Ziegler, curator out of LA, Nina Marie Lister, an ecologist and planner out of Toronto, Sarah Zodi, landscape architect, who will be doing a piece in conversation with Ann Whiston Spurn, landscape architect. Anne was the chair of the department at Penn when I started graduate work there. And so Sarah, in an interesting way, is connecting 3 generations of landscape architecture through photography and the collective work of the book. We've got Dee Nichols, who's a social activist in St. Louis, and Julia Zerniak, who's a design critic and landscape architect out at Syracuse. It's an incredibly rich set of essayists, also addressing some of the bigger issues that are implicit in the photographs and implicit in the work that we're doing. So look for that in the next 6 to 12 months.
I feel like that would be a great exhibition as well at some gallery.
I've got to say that the photographs are just stunning. Really, really amazing. And you're right, we will be hopefully organizing a few exhibits of that work.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. thank you so much for being open and honest and candid. Um, and if do you have any closing words or advice or?
No, look, it's a pleasure to be able to sit and chat and just share stories. I think hopefully anyone that's out there listening is doing it in a safe place with friends or family. And I think it's a good time for all of us to just reflect on those connections that are important in our lives. And again, taking advantage of some of those opportunities that we still have, even in the places that our movement is most restricted. We still have some opportunities to be out carefully, safely within the public realm, and interacting with each other and momentarily, even if it's a brief passing moment and a smile. To be able to make that social connection with people. I think that's critical at this moment.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Cheers.